Hello, everyone. I'm Brooks Raiford, president of the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech, and I would like to welcome you to today's NC Tech Talk. NC Tech has been working to include virtual programs as part of our overall programming, but the current stay-at-home orders have accelerated this plan and provided us with the opportunity to shift to more of a virtual approach. To that end, we've built several online offerings, including our NC Tech Talk series, where we engage with key leaders from across North Carolina to talk about what's on their mind and how their organization might be adapting to today's environment. We've had great response to our virtual programming. Thank you all for taking time to join us. We are recording today's conversation, and we'll send you a link to it in our follow-up. One of the biggest questions facing us all is, what will the near and longer term impact of the COVID-19 virus be? We have seen historic numbers of North Carolinians filing for unemployment, and we know that there will be an economic impact on businesses as well. But today we want to focus on some of the areas that don't always come to the forefront until we're confronted with them. Things like price gouging or rent protections and the like. These are all areas that our State Attorney General Stein keeps a watchful eye over, and we're honored to have him with us here to talk about some of these issues. Our format today will start with some welcome remarks from our sponsor, and then I'll take it from there and ask Attorney General Stein several prepared questions. We invite you to use the Q&A function to submit additional questions for the Attorney General, and I'll do my best to filter those and pose them throughout our dialogue. Note that there is a separate chat function. Please only use that if you have technical difficulties or questions, and my fellow staff members will respond to those. To kick things off, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's session, which is Charter Communications, and invite their Senior Director of Government Affairs, Gregory, to say a few words of welcome. Brian?
Thank you, Brooks. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. Charter Communications is a proud member of NC Tech, and in fact, I serve on the board. You may be familiar with the name of Spectrum, which is how we brand our services. That obviously includes video, broadband, voice, and mobile services. We operate in over 41 states, but we're very heavily invested and proud of our investment in North Carolina. We have over 10,000 employees and serve hundreds of cities across the state. Our networks are providing these critical services that you need for your homes and businesses, especially during this unusual time where many people are working remotely. In fact, Charter has offered 60 days of free broadband service of up to 100 megabits to any new household with students or teachers. And we're also doing a number of things, such as opening up our hotspots to the public and offering free video content. And we're very pleased to be here today as a sponsor, and we very much look forward to our conversation with Attorney General Stein, who's been such a strong advocate for our state. So, Brooks, I'll turn it back over to you, and thanks again, everybody.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian, and thanks to Charter for being a great supporter of the association and for sponsoring today's conversation. And I'm also especially pleased to have as our featured guest my friend Josh Stein. He was elected Attorney General in 2016, and in his role has worked to protect taxpayers, seniors, students, and military families from fraud. His Department of Justice has won awards for settlements in tens of millions of dollars from scam artists. He's also working to improve data security and is leading a national effort to combat robocalls. Additionally, his office has recovered nearly $50 million from tax cheats and healthcare providers defrauding Medicaid over the past couple of years. Josh previously served in the state Senate and also was a senior deputy attorney general in the North Carolina Department of Justice. He grew up in Chapel Hill. He's probably really glad I switched out of my NC State shirt for this broadcast. And he's a graduate of Dartmouth College and earned his law and public policy degrees from Harvard University. Attorney General Stein, thank you for making the time to be with us today, and welcome to NC Tech.
Brooks, great to see you. And Jim, thank you and Charter for supporting this program.
Thank you for being part of this. Great part of our series. So we are the NC Tech Association. I wonder if you could speak, just to start things off on a more sort of personal business level, how has your office and the Department of Justice adapted to working remotely, serving constituents, et cetera, during a time like this?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how fast and giant a leap forward we've all taken. I mean, if you had told me 2 months ago that the entire Attorney General's office could work remotely and the Department of Justice could well function I'm not sure I would believe you. I mean, we've just got a handful of people in our IT department, and they've worked miracles. I mean, everybody is all set up doing their work remotely. I'm actually in the office today because I had a number of things back to back, but I'm not usually coming into the office. I'm usually working at home, just like everyone else at the AG's office. And it's really been quite remarkable. The ability to telecommute I mean, lawyers, it's a profession that lends itself well to working remotely because it's a lot of research on the internet, writing, reading, stuff that you can do at home. A lot of what I do is more public facing, but with this, with Zoom and WebEx and Microsoft Office, it's just amazing what you can get done, and you almost think you're with the other people.
Well, you said something that triggered a follow-up question, and that is a couple of years ago, the then Chief Justice of North Carolina Supreme Court had established the North Carolina Commission on the Future on the Administration of Law and Justice, and I served on that commission. There was a working group on technology, as you can imagine, as part of that. And one of the things that was made very clear through that process for me is with 100 counties, a state court system, a federal court system, et cetera, all kind of interacting together. In North Carolina, we're one of a relatively small number of states that has a unified court system, but the variance among counties and the level of technology used, what is on paper still, what you have to walk into a courthouse and handle versus what you can do remotely, it was tremendous, the difference that existed out there. I know that's not necessarily your area to run, but talk a little bit about that.
No, it's real. It's absolutely real that there is a wide variation in terms of how different county courthouses and prosecutorial districts have utilized technology to this point. I think it's really underscored the importance of how we have to make a massive investment in the administrative office of the courts so it can be more widely distributed. Just an example, I did a joint statement with Chief Justice Sherry Beasley about domestic violence. One of the most crimes are either stagnant or declining during this shelter-in-place time because folks are home, so it's harder for crime to occur. But one crime that does occur at home is domestic violence. And when you add in all the level of stress and strain, it's not surprising that we've seen an uptick in domestic violence. And so we did a statement in which we underscored that the courts remain open, even though courts for in-person hearings have been held back till I think it's June 1st, the Chief Justice said. For domestic violence protective orders, the courts remain open. And what we asked was any county court that has the technological capacity to do the hearings remotely to do that, because we don't want people who fear for their physical health and the need a protective order to have to go into a courthouse and put their physical health in jeopardy because of a virus. But we couldn't make it a universal directive because simply not every court in the state has the wherewithal to pull it off.
Right. It just shows that your experience in what should be an equal access and equal experience can be different just because of the availability or lack thereof of technology or expertise.
No,
on a related note, one of your key functions obviously is consumer protection. One would say that's probably the key function for the public's perspective. And some of that work is done in the field, checking on retailers, checking on car dealerships and so forth, just to make sure that good business practices are in place, fraud is not occurring, they're not saying something's on sale when it's not on sale, that sort of stuff. How is field work done in this environment?
Well, we actually use the people to be our investigators. I would say the majority of cases we bring are a result of consumers filing complaints with our office. And when we get a handful of complaints and we start to see a pattern or a practice of unfair or deceptive trade practices, that's when we'll take it up to the litigation level. We encourage anyone who has problems with any business to file a complaint with our office because we have success often in mediating those complaints to find a resolution that works for the business and the consumer. But when we start to see a lot going on, essentially a hot spot, that's when we'll kick it into drive for litigation. I would say that the nature of the consumer complaints we've gotten probably wouldn't surprise people. Questions about canceled vacation rentals at the beach, or travel that got canceled, or we've had a ton of issues about economic hardship, and we'll talk some about that later, I'm sure. And then we see price gouging and just standard scams that are going on, and folks are letting us know about those things. We just did an alert an hour ago, and this is relevant to small businesses, where somebody, as a buddy of mine who owns a business in Charlotte, he got a text, and it said, your application for the PPP is being held up. We didn't get your bank account number right. Click here, make sure we've got your bank account number right. And obviously that was a phishing scam looking for his financial information, probably to clean out his bank account, if I had to guess. But it was alarming enough that we just sent it out statewide through our alert system and to notify the press. So we just want folks to know the nature of the scams that are going on.
Do you get much, that just makes me think of something, I have a daughter who's in college out of state. And so when we're dealing with things like whether or not the apartment complex is being willing to work with a leaseholder on the terms of that lease in a situation like this, or you feel like there's some fraud going on that is involving an out-of-state relative, do you have a lot of inbound inquiries from people who either have relatives here, children here in college, those sorts of things, or are you really predominantly North Carolina outreach?
You know, if we have been getting those kinds of complaints, they haven't risen to me yet, so I haven't heard about them. I have heard about out-of-state people concerned about vacations on our coast.
Right.
The college angle, I had not heard.
Okay. I just figured that's going to be a common thing for the next few months for sure. Well, you talked about fraud and scamming, so there's always a lot of that, or some level of that going on at any given time, but there's often a spike during emergencies, and we typically associate, at least in our state, we associate the term emergencies with hurricanes and floods and other more natural disasters. So what is similar or unique about this situation in terms of the types of complaints you're getting, the volume, where the spikes are?
Yeah. The reason we have a price gouging law is for when the governor declares a state of emergency. At that point, the market isn't working properly. People are desperate. Then that is the only reason why we're into setting prices or making sure the prices don't go crazy, is because it's not a balanced marketplace. Traditionally, we see these after big storms. And so after the 2 hurricanes that hit a couple years ago in southeastern North Carolina, what we saw, trees on people's roofs. People had to get the trees off or else their house would face, huge damage. Folks were coming up and saying, hey, I'll take that tree off your house. And they would be engaged in bait and switch, misrepresentations, or just out and out gouging. And folks were charging $25,000, $30,000 for a single tree, just outrageous sums. So we ended up bringing 7 different lawsuits against 22 different defendants, and have resolved most of those, and in the process won settlements and awards back to consumers for nearly $750,000. What we've been seeing in this is, one, it affects not only the whole state of North Carolina, not just a region, affecting the whole country. But the nature of the scams are a little bit different, not surprising. There have been some door-to-door, people knocking on doors offering free testing kits or making assertions about the virus. But we're seeing a lot of email, we're seeing a lot of phone, a lot of text, and social media posts where they're preying on people's fear and the uncertainty and being scared, because they know that when people are in that condition, they make decisions which they might later regret. It's a different kind of fear than having a tree on your house, but it's the same kind of fear in that it has to do with your well-being, your health. And so early on, we were seeing a lot of scams around the virus itself. we've got your test back. You have the virus. Call this number with your credit card so we can send you the antibodies. I mean, there is no treatment. There is no vaccine.
Right.
Testing scams, fake masks, scams around masks. And when the economic aspect started to hit after the health, whether it was the economic impact payments or these PPP loans, then we're starting to see, like what I just said, phishing attacks where they're trying to either get people's financial records or trying to phish to get into your computer and install whatever malware they can.
Yeah, you've touched on a number of things. One of my questions coming up, you've kind of answered already, which is the digital scamming, the phone, the text, the emails, and so on. You obviously are part of a network of attorneys general around the country, and you all communicate, I'm sure, on trends or things you're seeing that might pop up in one area first and then move. It may not be quite as true from a digital standpoint. Are you hearing, or is what you're hearing from your fellow attorneys general resonating with you and very similar to what you're seeing here? Are there some things that are different here than elsewhere, or vice versa?
It has not. I'll tell you in a minute about a price gouging lawsuit we just filed yesterday having to do with the towing company. That has been, I hadn't heard that in other states, so it seems somewhat unique to North Carolina. But these other types of scams, they're just playing out all across the country, because one thing about technology is it's not only a tool for you and me, it's a tool for criminals. It's an incredibly cheap way to touch millions of people. And their yield rate does not have to be very high in order for it to pay off for them, because it's so cheap to send out an email to 50 million email addresses. And if they only get a small number of people who bite, whether it's giving over their financial information or giving away money, then it has proved cost beneficial to the criminal. And so it has been across the country, bipartisan, Democratic and Republican attorneys general. We're all sharing all the scams we're hearing. We're all taking from each other different tips that they're providing to their constituents so that my constituents can also benefit from it. This is really a national issue.
Before I ask my next question, just want to remind our audience that we have a Q&A function within Zoom. So if you want to use that to submit a question or a comment, I'll do my best to work those in. So thank you for doing that. Last thing on this whole digital stuff, we've talked about what some of the digital scams are, text, phone, email, and you mentioned that you had done a statewide, I guess, I don't know if that was an email follow-up, but anyway, some sort of statewide alert about these things. What tools do you have? You've got the lawsuit capability, obviously, but any tools that you have or that you use that would be of interest to our audience on how you actually deal with these when you hear about them, when you find out about them?
Our greatest tool as relates to scams and fraud is really public education. Using whatever method of communication we have at our disposal, which is speeches, virtual speeches now, emails, posting on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all the social media sites. We just want to educate people to the extent possible that, hey, understand these are the kind of scams we're hearing about. The one that comes to you next may be a little bit different from the ones we're telling you about, but just understand they share certain commonality. They try to play on your fear. They try to get you to divulge information, either your personal information or your financial information, in order to monetize that to your detriment. And so we urge people to be skeptical. If they have questions, to call our office, 877-5-NO-SCAM. We actually are going to be doing some advertisements in newspapers because we figure we just want to make sure everybody out there knows there are a lot of different scams going on. Folks are hurting. I mean, people are scared of their health, of their loved ones. A lot of people are struggling financially. More than a million North Carolinians in the last 6 weeks have filed for unemployment, just a truly mind-boggling figure. People don't have income. They're scared. And so what we don't want is for people who are already hurting to be hurt worse by losing whatever little bit of money they have.
And I think it's often noted that very rarely is a legitimate financial institution going to ask you for personal information in the way of account numbers and credit card numbers in an email. That's just not going to be, that's your first sign that it's probably not worth doing.
Yeah, if you get something where you're really just, you think there's enough truth there, don't respond to what you get, likely an email. Find out the actual phone number to the institution. Call them directly yourself and say, I got this. Do you need this information or not? And they'll tell you 9 times out of 10 that it was a phishing email where they're trying to steal stuff from you. But for that 1 time out of 10 where they actually did need some information to finalize some kind of transaction for you, you have the confidence in responding at that point.
Exactly. I'm going to shift to something you touched on earlier, and that is you have advocated for relief of some debt collection activities, perhaps rent or mortgage relief and similar. Of course, many landlords are small, maybe a person who happens to own a rental house. They're not a giant company themselves. So small landlords, small businesses who also are affected by the inability to collect rent or other debts, which hurts them in a very real way too. So there's a fine line there. How do you walk that fine line between helping one group possibly to the detriment of another in a way that both are well served?
Yes, it is challenging. Essentially, we need to push the relief up as high as we can, understanding that people have financial distress at every level. So, for instance, people owe money to the state of North Carolina. A lot of people owe money to the state of North Carolina. It's the biggest corporate entity in North Carolina is the state. So I make sure people pay back whatever they owe to the state. I announce that folks who owe money to the state, you still owe money to the state. We're just not going to force you to pay. We're not going to go to court to order you to pay during the state of emergency because you need that money to put food on your table. So if somebody doesn't have income, they are going to have trouble paying their rent. They're going to have trouble paying their credit card bill. They're going to have trouble paying their internet bill. All of these things, their utility bill, all of these things they need for life. So I worked with the governor on an executive order in which he ordered all utilities to maintain service for water, gas, power during this crisis and not to impose any late fees on people. They will have to pay you back. And when they do, work with them to work out a payment plan over time. Because in month 4, if they can pay you back in month 4 after not being able to pay you back in the first 3 months, they're not going to be able to pay you back in month 4 for that month and the previous 3 months. You're going to have to work those 3 months in over time, work out a payment plan. And I did an initiative with phone companies, urging phone companies and internet providers to do the exact same thing. It is critical, life-saving infrastructure. People need to have access to the internet to get information about how to live their lives, or if they have children so they can go to school. All of these things are critical, and we ask companies to work with them. Now, in the terms of the landlord, I've talked to a number of landlords, and they said, some of my tenants can pay me, others can't. I'm working with those who can't, but then I've got to appeal to my bank and make sure that the bank works with me on my loan. And one landlord was telling me about Truist, and they said Truist called them on their own initiative and said, look, we understand a number of your commercial tenants are going to be in financial distress. Let's talk now about working out a plan so that we have no intention of foreclosing on you. And basically, those are the conversations that need to happen. And I urge tenants to affirmatively reach out to their landlords. I urge cell phone companies to reach out to their cell phone carrier. I urge borrowers to reach out to their lender. Explain your situation. The creditors just want to know what can you afford and how long is it going to take you to get back. And I think that most of them will work with you. And obviously, anybody who can pay their bills needs to pay their bills, because that gives the companies the capital they need to be more flexible to those who can't.
It sounds like most of the effort is around forbearance versus forgiveness. So some sort of way to delay and defer what's owed without necessarily wiping away the fact that funds are owed.
Yeah, they've used the service. They need to pay for it.
Yeah.
We all have to be realistic. We're in absolutely uncharted territory. None of us have experienced anything like this.
And this fact, I should point out to our audience that we actually have a new page on our website. If you go to nctech.org, you'll see a resources tab at the top. And when you hover over that, the drop-down menu now includes a COVID-19 resource page that has two different parts to it. One is companies that are members of ours that are offering things like what Charter, Brian Gregory mentioned about Charter at the beginning. In his case, it's 60 days of free service for new customers where they have children or teachers at home that don't have access right now to internet. Other companies are doing similar types of, free periods of time or some sort of significant discounting. So you'll see a roster of those there. And then separately, a different page are a different set of resources that might not be services oriented, but could be professional services or other sorts of things. So I would encourage folks to take a look. And on a similar note, the tech community is often asked, or I'm often asked, what does the tech community think about how this economic downturn, however long or short it may be, will impact the tech sector in terms of hiring, firing, when will the economy turn around? Has it increased demand for your services? Some companies, that's been the case, particularly in the tech arena, since we're all using it more than usual right now. And in other cases, it's been hard hit. So we have been conducting a poll of leaders within the tech environment in North Carolina, several hundred. And we did it at the end of March, again at mid-April, and again just recently at the end of April. And we'll do this again mid-May, end of May, and mid-June and end of June. And post the results of this 10-question poll on our website, which you can find when you go there, to see what the sentiment is of leaders within the tech sector anyway about some of those questions, which I think now that we've had 3 of these polls, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift here or there over time as to when people think the economy will begin to rebound, what shape that recovery might look like. You've heard a lot about what I'm calling the alphabet soup of scenarios. You have the L curve, you have the W, you have the U curve, you have the V curve. So take a look on our site, all of you who are listening in, and follow that along. See what the leadership within the tech community has to say, and see if it resonates with what you're experiencing or what you're seeing. I want to come back to our guest, the Attorney General, with a question about something else you've touched on. That is, you pointed out there are a couple of areas that might fly under the radar but deserve resources and attention. You mentioned victims of domestic abuse and how they can still seek help, including physical relocation if that's needed. Another is how to ensure that children who are home more are staying safe from online scams, predators, and so on. So can you expound a little bit on that area of your work and what your offerings are?
Yes, and since you mentioned your resource page, I'm going to do the same.
Sure.
We've got ncdoj.gov/COVID-19 is our resource page. If you just do Google NCDOJ, North Carolina Department of Justice, COVID-19, the page will pop right up. And it highlights all of our work protecting consumers from scams, price gouging, protecting families from violence, and trying to help people who are financially struggling. And we have a separate page there for giving a list of resources available to people who are in financial distress. In terms of keeping people safe, that's obviously a core mission of the Attorney General's office. I mentioned the domestic violence issue, how we're seeing an uptick in that, and my work with the Chief Justice to try to let people know that resources are available to them if they have any fear for themselves or their loved ones. We urge them to take advantage of it. Obviously, it's a difficult time for many people in unhappy homes. Another element of keeping people safe is the internet. Internet is just such an incredible tool, but there's a lot of dark corners in the internet, and those dark areas pose risks to young people. And young people already spend a lot of time online, but now it's just through the roof. And so that's great that Spectrum and Charter, Brian, are increasing the amount of internet capacity that they're allowing people to access, because kids are online all the time. They're not with their friends, so they're on social media sites. They're now at school online because they're doing their school remotely at home.
Right.
And so making sure that parents have some concrete tips about what they can do to enhance the security, the safety of their children when they're online is important. And we have a whole bunch of those tips on that resource page that I mentioned earlier, Brooks.
We do an email follow-up to everyone who's signed up for today, so we'll include some of that information when we go back out to everyone. We also will add that to our own resource page, so people who see that can know where to turn.
That's great.
One question that came through actually probably is asking me to clarify something, and that is I made the reference to some lenders or debt holders will offer forbearance or deferral. And there can be a distinction there. Forbearance often does still come with added cost because the interest might still be accruing even if your payments are deferred. A deferral would be literally deferring an amount that you owe, and the amount may not change. So there can be a difference there. So as you're talking to lenders or anybody you owe money to, be cognizant that there can be a definitional difference there that might be important to you. So,
and for mortgagors that, let's say somebody needs to pay their mortgage and they can't, mortgagors, they don't want to foreclose, and they don't want to charge late fees or late penalties, but that month somebody still has to pay the taxes, somebody still has to pay the insurance. And so in many instances, the lender is having to actually spend money in addition to not getting the principal and interest payment back. So I fully recognize that this is creating real strain on financial institutions. And, ultimately, it's got to fall on the taxpayer through the federal government to backstop a lot of this. And it has. I mean, the amount of federal resources that have flowed into the economy appropriately so is, again, like if I'd said to you, Brooks, that there would be more than $3 trillion in appropriations and multiples of that by the Fed priming the economy 2 months ago, you would have said there's less than 0.1% that would ever happen. Because even in the height of the Great Recession 11, 12 years ago, the most the Fed's put in was like $700, $800 billion. And that we're now talking about 3 times that, 4 times that. It's just amazing.
I'll add on to that to say that you mentioned that we've just crossed 1 million North Carolinians. Keep in mind that's out of about 7 million or so. Is that right? Or I'm closer to 10 now. But 1 million North Carolinians who've applied for unemployment. By way of reference, when we had a session, I had Representative Jason Stein for one of these conversations not too long ago, who's serving as one of the leaders of the COVID-19 task force in the House, the Select Committee. But also as appropriations chair. And we were noting at that time, in just the 4 weeks, the first 4 weeks of this spike in unemployment, when 500,000 people had applied, that's compared to the Great Recession where the peak was 100,000 in a month. So it's just a factor of 5 to 10 now in that same span of time, which is remarkable. I have one more question from the audience and a quick closing question for me, and then we'll wrap up so we can end on time for you. The question that's come in is, could the Attorney General give an update on House Bill 904, updating the Identity Theft Protection Act?
Yeah, and you just mentioned Representative Stein, who's been the chief sponsor of this bill. It's a joint creation of his office and my office. And the whole idea is to strengthen North Carolina's protections against identity theft. Our laws are pretty good, but they could be better. And what we've seen in each of the last 3 years is an increasing number of security breaches that have occurred across the state. And given how much of our lives are online right now, I kind of shudder to think about what kind of breaches are occurring just because so much is being done remotely now. So we just want to make sure that people's information is protected to the maximum extent possible, and that when breaches occur, people are informed as soon as practicable so that we can take whatever steps are necessary to protect our personal information, primarily through the use of security freezes, credit freezes. And so that bill is alive, and we've talked with Jason and his office, and we're going to continue trying to push it.
Okay, thank you. So as we close out, I wonder if you could describe again and expound on what you said already, some of the general structure of your office so that folks have some sense of where to go depending on what sort of assistance they need.
So in terms of our public-facing work, where we're most helpful to the general public is through consumer protection. And we have a toll-free number, 877-5-NO-SCAM. We also have online complaint forms, ncdoj.gov/complaint. And folks can let us know about what they're encountering out there where they're having trouble. The other things we do are represent the state. We work in the criminal justice system to defend justice, to defend just verdicts of people who've been convicted. We train law enforcement. We also analyze crime scene evidence at the state crime lab. All of this work is being turned upside down. The crime lab, they're having to alternate who's in the lab at what time to minimize getting in each other's space. Justice Academy has had a tremendous reversal from in-person training to online training during the last 2 months. And I expect that trend will continue. We are not able to help everybody with everything that they are facing. If you've lost your job and need unemployment, or you're a business and you need a PPP, or you have questions about childcare, or if you're concerned about your utility payment or your telephone bill, if you're having trouble with your lender renegotiating a debt, we can help on some of those things. We can't help with all of them, but we have this resource page on our website, which if we can't do the work, we will direct you to those who can help you most. And just Google NCDOJ and economic relief, and that page will pop right up.
Great. Well, we'll definitely share that and the phone number that you mentioned earlier and some other links that you touched on with our follow-up and also on our general site. With that, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. I know the demands of your time are heavy. You're great to spend some time with us today, and I know that we've worked together on a number of issues over time, and we'll continue to do that and be a resource for you and with you. And I also want to thank Charter Communications and Brian Gregory, who's a member of our board, for supporting today's session. This is part of a series, a fairly new one. We have gotten over a dozen leaders from different walks of life and different organization types to agree to do this sort of session. A number of them are already scheduled, and a number of them are in the process of being scheduled, and a few have already occurred. So if you go to our website, you'll find a page where all of these are outlined, and you can keep an eye on what's coming up down the road. And it's quite a mix. We have ranging from owners of professional sports teams to the head of IPOs for the New York Stock Exchange, to a joint session with the mayors of Raleigh and Charlotte to talk about how cities are dealing with this sort of thing, and more. So I encourage everyone to take a look. Our web address is nctech.org. Please follow us there and let us know how we can be of service to you. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Josh. Thank you to Charter. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for including me, Brooks. Take care.
Thank you.